Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this second webinar in our Eurodoc Open Science Ambassador Training Series. This webinar will be on open access by our guest expert Bernard Rentier. My name is Gareth O'Neill, I'm the president of Eurodoc, and we are co-organizing this for 30 of our Eurodoc national representatives to become Open Science Ambassador. So this course consists of 8 modules that everybody will be able to follow and use afterwards and rewatch and so forth online. And we are co-organizing this with Ivo Grigorev, who is in the back working on YouTube, and also Roberto Moscon, who is also in the back working on YouTube. So I'm going to very quickly explain to you what open science is and why it's important for Eurodoc. So basically, Eurodoc is a non-profit organization representing 29 national associations of doctoral candidates and postdoctoral researchers across Europe. We're a non-profit, we rely on volunteer work, and we are funded solely by and for our early career researcher members. We develop policies on many topics. I'll go into them in a moment. And we do this in working groups and attending events and meeting stakeholders and attending policy workshops. There's 3 main issues for early career researchers at the moment that we find important. The first one is career development, and specifically career development for the non-academic labor market. Most early career researchers must leave academia but are not being trained or helped in this at their institutions. The second one linked to that is the rising number of doctoral candidates and postdoctoral researchers we see who are stressed or anxious or even show signs of clinical depression. So mental health has been a taboo, and we take this very seriously at Eurodoc and are trying to address this. And the third one is the move towards what is called open science, or opening up research, which is what we're going to look at today and over this course. So open science is nothing new. We've been doing this in some manner for easily over 400 years. You could argue maybe even 2,000 years to some extent. But within the European context, this is a relatively new policy initiative from 2016 by the Commissioner Carlos Moedas. And essentially open science is a way of opening up research results using digital tools. This is connected for the European Commission to what's called open innovation. So how you use your open research to involve more stakeholders and to basically drive the innovation process in Europe to create new products and new services. And these two are linked to what is called open to the world. So how you bring in more societal actors into the innovation and research process, how you make your research and your products societally relevant, and not just that we only do this for all of us in Europe, but that we open this up to other countries outside of Europe who may not be able to do the same type of research as we are, and we try to get them involved in what we're doing in Europe. Now, what exactly is open science? Well, we heard in the first webinar from Bianca Kramer about this. But just very summarily, open science is a very broad umbrella term. I think if you ask any individual, they'll give you a different answer. But for our purposes, it consists of a lot of different specific practices, such as open access, open data, but also open education or open evaluation or open source code or even citizen science. So it consists of quite a lot of different practices that we will look at over the course of this module and over this training. Why should we do open science? Well, basically, it's opening up access to research. It increases the discoverability of your research and your research data. It increases the impact for your career, but also the social impact and relevance for society by giving access. It also facilitates reproducibility. If you open it up, people can see what you've done and try to do that. It helps when you have limited resources, so you can share and pool resources. And this, in turn, basically helps and speeds up innovation. And just to note, we do not speak of open as black and white term, but open is a gradation of stages of openness. It does not have to be fully open, and it does not have to be fully or immediately open in some cases. And in that case, we speak of as open as possible. So you try to be as open as possible when you're doing this. And just to finish off with Eurodoc's stance on open science. So we fully support open science. We have done for many years. We try to raise awareness on this. But crucially, we ask institutions to train, support, and to reward researchers to do open science at their institutions, in their career and in their research evaluations. If you're interested in more courses on open science, you can click the links in the presentation there and have a look at the Fostering the Open Science MOOC. These are online courses. I am going to stop there, and I'm going to hand the floor over to our guest speaker, Bernard Rentier, who is an honorary rector at the University of Liège. Bernard, thank you for joining us. I'm going to give the floor to you. If you could just introduce yourself, and then I'll put up the presentation.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I'm Bernard Rentier, and as Gareth said, I'm the former rector of the University of Liège. In my career, I was first a researcher, of course, and I have been very often frustrated by the difficulties to have access to the literature, which at the time was, of course, only in books and reviews. So later on, I became vice rector in the university, and I was in charge of research and libraries. So I could see how the two connected and how they could connect better, actually. And when I became a rector in 2005, I started to install a repository, an institutional repository in my university. So it's an electronic archive on which the researchers put their manuscripts as soon as they are being published by a publisher. I will come to that, and I will explain what is the principle. What made my reputation good or bad, I don't know at the time, was the fact that I imposed a mandate to the researchers. So in my university, nobody had any other choice than putting their manuscripts on the electronic archive. And this was an absolute success. We now have more than 90% of the production of the university online available. And this has boosted in an incredible way the readership for our researchers in our own university. Of course, it takes skills by the people in charge of the repository. They have to make sure that it's well referenced, and that you catch up by simply by keywords and very easily the work that is indeed available. So I will explain how we got to that and what it means to have access, an open access to literature. So the next slide will tell you how science works, actually, because every time you have to look at a problem, you must go back to the roots. And back to the roots takes us 350 years back in the mid-17th century, where first science started to be transmitted, to be shared among the scientists. Science is knowledge, of course, and discovery, but it is transmitted. If you don't receive by transmission the knowledge, you're not able to get it all. So actually everybody is building on everybody else's work, which is previous. But if you want to do that, you must know exactly what is there, what has been discovered before. And so the communication is very, very important. And the first way of communicating was, of course, by talking together. And the first societies, the first learned societies were on that purpose, people talking with each other. And then they wanted to spread a little more, and they started to use books and magazines, if we can say that at the time. So they were sending letters, and they were published, and that was, in fact, what we call publication. Now, access to knowledge is a very important thing. Next slide will show you that, in fact, knowledge is a human right. It's part of something broader, which is the right to education. But education brings knowledge, so knowledge is also a human right, like education. And when there are public funds involved in generating knowledge, then people, the public, must have access, must have an immediate, rapid, and unimpeded access to the literature, the scientific literature, the scholarly literature. When it's paid by the public, there's no reason why the public would pay twice. So when with your taxes you have paid for the research, then you have the right to have access to what this research has brought up. And it's so very, very important that the public authorities and also the funders, which may be also privately run funders, but the public authorities have the duty to make sure that the knowledge is being shared. And the university authorities must do so also. Next slide. Yeah, I've already mentioned that the history dates back to the 17th century, but in the 19th century and the 20th century, we saw subcontracting to commercial publishers. In other words, the scientists themselves didn't want to take all the job to, in fact, prepare and dispatch all the knowledge. So they actually subcontracted, it's the right word, to commercial publishers. And these commercial publishers started to spread the information, and they did that very well for over a century. At the end of the 20th century, it became very, very problematic because to sustain financially the publishers, they needed to resource to of course funding and private funding, and it really became a business, and a very big business. At the end of the years 1900, we saw an enormous change, which was the fact that the publishers merged together, the big ones swallowed the small ones, and it became a world, a very capitalistic world, where, of course, the classical distribution remained the same, but at a time when internet came in. And so the problem at the end of the 20th century was the problem of internet, which was providing immediate access, and science still was not spread through this new tool. And it took a while, because the proposal to have an open access on internet to science is 25 years old now already. But it has progressed very, very slowly. Next slide. We are run, of course, by prestige and tradition. And in universities and in research centers, people are extremely sensitive to prestige and tradition, like probably in many other areas of humankind. Of course, the prestige of the publishers came from the quality of their editing. That cannot be denied. And they have done a very, very good job in maintaining the standards. And this is why the academics, in some kind of a very conservative attitude, are afraid of changing the system. And they have the concept that if you publish on the internet, then it's going to be garbage. Which is, of course, not true. But, of course, you also have to make sure to have the guarantee that what is being put on the internet is being controlled by peers. That is the famous peer reviewing system, which is perfectly feasible on a system which is run on internet rather than in books and papers. But I would say that the main break is exactly that. Now, the next difficulty is that we are very much used to the fact that evaluation of scientists, of researchers, is based on journal impact factors. You probably heard of that, and other irrelevant metrics or poorly relevant metrics, because they are indirect proxies. It's not because you're publishing in a very prestigious journal that your paper is extremely good. It can be, but it's not necessarily linked. So this is where actually the system has some difficulty to impose itself. Now, next slide will also remind you that there is a captive market, and we are the market, and we are captive. From whom? From the big publishers, especially 5, maybe a little more, but there are 5 very, very big publishers that you all have heard of, and who enjoy a sort of a virtual monopoly. They hold the thing, they increase the price, and nobody can do anything about it. Like subscriptions to the journals have increased by almost 1,000% in 20 years, which is much, much, much higher than anything else that you can buy on Earth. So in fact, it's an extremely profitable business, and there is no correlation between the real cost and what you are actually buying. So the costs are skyrocketing, and the researchers are stuck with the system because they don't want to publish elsewhere, because they consider that if they publish elsewhere, they will be less well considered, less well rewarded. And so the researchers keep publishing with these big publishers. They do the work of editing for them, because if the quality is so good, it's not because the publisher is good, it's because the editor, that is the scientist who is editing, is doing a good job. And there's the scientists, the researchers are also reviewing for free. They give their time to the publishers, and they're usually very proud to be asked to be a peer reviewer. So we as scientists, we are in fact pulling on the brakes, as well as the publishers are pulling on the brakes in front of this new opening, which is the open access. Okay, next slide. The costs, in fact, are escalating, as I said, and there is an overproduction. And this is really facing new technologies that can reduce the cost and reduce the overproduction. So, as I said, the subscriptions have blown up in terms of cost. The metrics that are being used, it is how many papers did you publish last year or in the last 5 years? This simple question is pushing people to publish many papers rather than a few good papers. And so there is an overpublication, publishing too much, fragmentation, because we tend to cut our papers in several, so that we have several papers with one material, and also, unfortunately, in some cases, fraud, because of the pressure, which is called publish or perish. You've heard that. There is, of course, a tendency to fraud, which is becoming a very serious problem now. Now, there are so many papers because of that nobody can read them. And in many cases, if you publish a paper, except yourself and maybe your parents, nobody is going to read that paper. And this is frightening, because then researchers are beginning to publish papers not so much to be read, but to improve their curriculum vitae. And this is a disaster. Okay, and reading everything is no longer possible, and reviewing everything is no longer possible. So the reviewers are overwhelmed with tasks of reviewing. They can no longer do that. Next slide. And so we're coming to one of the first solution that was proposed, which is called Green OA. I will explain why green and OA is open access. So what we call green open access is what I described that I did in Liège. Researchers submit their manuscript to the publisher immediately after it's accepted, and don't do it if it's not accepted. But if it's accepted, then you know that it will only be available for reading in paper that like 6 months or 1 year or 1 year and a half after you've been accepted. And it takes time to have acceptance first. But then what you can do is deposit your manuscript immediately in an institutional repository. And there it can be open or it can be closed. If the publisher tells you, okay, you're not supposed to open up your results and your paper like this, because then I won't have a chance to sell it. So you may not. And they impose what is called embargoes. And the embargo may be for 6 months or 12 months, according to the area of research. During that time, you're not supposed to open the repository. So your paper is in the repository, and then what you can do is keep it closed. And 6 months later, or 12 months later, according to your contract with the publisher, you open it. What happens in the embargo period? Well, during this period, your paper is there. You cannot access to it. But what you can make public is the title and keywords and the metadata. That is allowed. So what you can do, if you want to read somebody's paper published at the University of Liège, for instance, then you just go there and you click on the button that says, I request a print, request an email from this author so that he sends me his or her PDF. And so the manuscript in PDF is being sent to the reader. And this is a way to actually open, but one by one, to individual people. And the trick is that when after 6 months or 12 months, if you open up, then you multiply by 30 your chances to be read. So you have to remember to open as soon as you're allowed by contract. So this is not ruining any contract. It's not ruining anyone by the way. And the trick that I used in Liège to make sure to fill the repository was to have a mandate. So it was obligatory to deposit. And now it is still obligatory to deposit, but if we would decide not to make it obligatory, people would do it anyway because they love it, because they have much more readership and interaction with scientists all over the world than they had before. So this is really an optimal system. I acknowledge that this system pushed to the limit is, of course, putting the publishers in difficulty. Because if every university in the world would do the same thing, and they could, then there would be no reason to have subscriptions and to buy the journals anymore. Everything would be available, and we will get to that, because then the publishers were aware of it and they were scared. So what they did, they invented, or they are actually twisted, another notion, which is the gold open access. And the gold open access, next slide, was at the beginning the idea that you could publish or read both freely. Of course, that's sort of an ideal universe because things cost money. So the gold OA is sort of a utopic system. But the publishers use the word, captured the word, and said, we are going to publish gold, because what they took as granted in gold was the idea that reading is free. But publishing is not free, because if you want to publish, you have to pay me so that I publish, and you give me money, and then everybody can read. And I, publisher, will put your paper on the internet after reviewing and after editing and all that. So it's in fact called APC Gold OA, what is APC? It's article processing charges. The publishers say, we need you to pay charges so that we can process the article. In fact, if you calculate how much it costs to process an article, it's of course much less than what they are asking, because some of them actually, so it has been calculated that it costs probably between 250 and 500 euros for one article, and they are now asking up to 4, 5, 6,000 of euros to publish your paper. Of course, they have to make as much money as they would do by subscriptions. If subscriptions disappear, they must keep their business. But their business is their business, and not ours. And ours is to save our money for research as much as we can. So that's the so-called gold OA. Then we come to the diamond OA. I'm not a big fan of all these colors and substances. Next slide. But the diamond OA is in fact free to publish and free to read. So who's bringing the money? Well, the public service is doing the job. And if the public service does that, then we're in good shape, because as well as they will give you money to buy all the stuff you need to do your research, they may also give you money so that you can publish. In that sense, it's fine, except that we have to make sure. So the difference here between gold and diamond is, in diamond we have to make sure that the price you pay to publish is, even if you don't pay yourself, if it's your funder who pays it or your university who pays it, in any case, the money you're paying must be covering the exact cost of your publication, not crazy prices that publishers may ask for financial reasons. So the diamond is, of course, the ideal system, and it's based on platforms, open publishing platforms, where you put your material and you are being judged on what you have been writing. So the peer reviewing is actually an open peer reviewing, where people can come, make comments, and they make comments not in an anonymous way as they do usually in the tradition, where you can hide there behind a wall and make judgments with nobody knowing that it's you behind there. So the opening is also an opening of the reviewing, and so it's not extraordinary. You're in the same situation as you would be if you are in a congress or a meeting, where you tell what you've been doing, and people can just interrupt and say, well, I don't understand what you're saying, and you're wrong to say this because I've done it, and so on and so on. So the discussion on the internet can be extremely useful, but it should be ordered and it should be controlled, of course. The advantage is everything is very accessible, very easily. And the next slide, the last slide, tells us that we have to keep in mind some dangers. First, the increase of the APC cost. So this crazy increase, skyrocketing, is just not possible. We have to resist that as much as possible and not play with those who are asking too much money. Second, this whole system has generated parasitic publishers who decided that there is money to make. They ask your money, they solicit you first very actively every day, and then they if you decide to publish with them, they let you believe that they do peer reviewing, which they don't do, and they publish, or sometimes even they don't publish. They take your money and they just rob it. So very, very dangerous, this for-profit parasitic system. The danger is also if the peer reviewing is not properly performed, which is what is happening with the parasitic publishers. And finally, the very important thing, but it will be talked about in the later discussions and webinars, is that researchers are nowadays still very often evaluated or assessed on the basis of very outdated criteria, such as the number of publications, the impact factor, and all these things that are inappropriate. So one of the main concerns is to make sure that while the system is changing to open, the evaluation of research and their careers must be also open and must be rewarding their tendency to open as much as possible. That's what I wanted to tell you today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bernard. I see a lot of questions have come in already. So I'm going to go straight to the first one, and that has to do with the so-called, well, the Rentier model or the Liège model. So what kind of resistance, if any, did you experience when you made this radical change? And they mean that by making it mandatory that everybody must deposit it in green open access.
Well, I did have some resistance. It's true. It was a small fraction of the research population of the university, and the reason why it was only a few, it was because I spent 2 full years constantly explaining what this was about and why it would be good. And I was, of course, taking chances because I had never done it before, but I was so convinced that that was the way to go that I really pushed hard. But every time I would make an official speech, which was at least once or twice a week, I would mention Orbi, which is the nickname we gave to the institutional repository. I decided that it needed nickname because then people could consider it as their pet, and in fact it worked. The big resistance I got was from people in the humanities first, mostly, and also people who were mostly publishing in French. And it turned out very quickly, within 2 years, that the ones that were the most enthusiastic about it were the people who are publishing in French, because indeed their publications started to be read in Africa and in Quebec and in all French-speaking countries, which was not the case before, because they used to publish with small publishers that didn't reach there. And the second population were people who were indeed working in humanities, because they suddenly discovered that they had a much wider audience. For the people in the medical field who were already having their papers in PubMed and so forth, the change was not so big, and so the resistance was was only on the fact that what I was asking them was considered as a chore, as an additional administrative duty. And so, and I was accused by some to force them to do extra work so that the university could have a complete inventory of what it is producing. And I claim that I think a university must have a complete inventory of what it is producing, or otherwise it would be the only organization which doesn't know what they're doing. So in fact, it's very important for the rector and for the authorities to have this inventory. But also it turned out that for the researchers, it was much easier. And when you ask somebody in Liège today to pull out their CV for some reason, they press a button and they have it in a perfect organized way. They don't lose anything. They love it. And it has really become a pet for everybody in the university.
Bernard, can I ask you why the humanities was so against this? I mean, was it just tradition, or did they have justifiable reasons?
Well, it was. In fact, the big push, except for the cost, the big push was coming from those who are publishing small articles in periodic journals. For humanities, the big thing to do is first of all to write books. And making books open access is a very, very difficult thing. Sometimes it's very difficult to transpose a book into a PDF that is downloadable. If you're working in I don't know, archaeology or art history, then you don't feel the need for this this new approach. So it was not so much the fact that they were obliged to do it. It was the fact that they didn't understand the advantage of open access.
Interesting. And this is a clarification question. Can you explain the difference between a preprint and an embargo period?
Yeah. Well, the embargo period is something that is invented and applied by publishers. They consider that, well, and they're absolutely right. When you sign a paper saying, I give away all my rights as a writer, then you cannot come back and say, well, after all, I'll take my rights back. No, you've given them away. This is why we're always trying to tell researchers, please publish with publishers who do not ask you to give up your rights. You may sign and have an agreement on a license, but don't forget that if you don't have the publishing rights, you do have the intellectual rights, and they have to remain with you. And if you give them away, then I, as a rector of a university, I will sanction you because you're not authorized to give away something that it belongs also to the university. So there is a whole debate on these legal approach, which of course is a very interesting one and a frightening one for researchers. They're afraid, and rightfully they're afraid to do things that they would not be supposed to do, to be blacklisted or to be attacked by a publisher. We have started the system with Orbi in 2007, so that's 12 years ago. We have had no legal problem at all with not a single researcher, and we are putting out 9,000 publications per year.
So people have adjusted there in Liège.
People are perfectly adjusted. It's a non-problem anymore. The problem is that people are very much solicited by predators, what I call the parasites. Because I think predation is also, I mean, when a big company, publishing company, is asking you 6,000 to to publish a paper, they're predating. But the parasitic system is really frightening, and so we have special courses given to our scholars so that they can detect what is parasitic or not.
I'm curious if you find 6,000 expensive, what you think of Nature's recent statement that they need to charge 10,000, even 30,000 for one article because of all their costs.
Yes. There's just one thing that I can agree with them. It is the fact that everybody is sending their papers to Nature because everybody wants to be published in Nature. Because if you are published in Nature, you have absolute fame. Everybody likes you, even if your paper is never read and never cited, which is happening for 86% of the papers in Nature, which are in fact cited less than the impact factor of the journal. So the reputation of the journal is based on 14% of the papers. But still, everybody's sending their papers to Nature. So the big work that Nature has to do is to sort out which papers they are going to publish, approximately 1,000 per year, when they receive 100,000. So how do they sort that out? And they need people. Then yes, I mean the selection is very heavy, but that does not justify 30,000, of course.
And this goes straight on to the next question. So is it true, or do you think that the higher the impact factor of a journal, the higher the number of fraudulent articles that will be submitted because they're trying to get this impact, and in a way they're forced to get impact?
Yes, that has been very often stated. I haven't seen any proof of that. But the only thing that is absolutely clear is that there is a positive correlation between the impact factor value and the retraction index. So the number of times that papers are retracted. And so from that observation, some people have said, okay, there is a correlation between high impact factor and poor quality. And I don't think that's the case. And I think we should be more cautious when looking at this graph and understand that also the more prestigious the journal is, the more chances that people are going to read it, and the more chances they are going to find the fraud or the mistakes. And so a paper, let's say in Nature, a paper is much more exposed than in a local small journal. So the retraction index is an indication, but it may not be fair.
And just it goes on in a way to moving to the concept of gold open access. So one of our ambassadors said that they read once that over 70% of all open access journals indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ, do not charge APCs. So should we not move away from the concept that gold open access equals paying an APC, an article processing charge?
Absolutely. I'm 100% against APC gold. I think it's usurpating the name first, because it's not gold at all. But it's also a very bad solution, because it will, I mean, greed is what it is in humankind, and you will never prevent people from trying to get money from you. And so you have to be careful, and you just don't have to be careful where you put your feet. And now there are, as you said, The majority of journals are don't charge, but of course it's a majority of journals, but it's not the majority of the scholarly literature. It's not exactly the same thing, because the ones who don't charge at all are usually smaller. So in terms of number of articles published, the proportion is a little bit different, of course, because half of the scientific literature is being published by Elsevier or consorts.
And continuing on with that idea that gold does not necessarily mean paying an APC, we have a question on how do you see the diamond model, so the model where you do not pay to read or publish.
Yep.
How do you see the diamond model being implemented realistically? Is it really a feasible option in the near future?
Oh yes, it is. It is an option. I think you will hear in the following webinars. You will hear about Plan S, for instance. And I'm not going to go into Plan S, but just the concept is a very good concept, basically, which is to say, the funder is going to ask you to make sure that your article is being in open access so that it can be read by everybody. The problem of Plan S is that it doesn't worry about how much it costs to do that, and how much it will cost you or your university or the funders themselves to do that. And some of the funders are even in agreement with the fact that they can pay. Okay, it's okay. Stop bothering us with with open access and so forth. Just make sure it's open access, and we'll pay the bill. And that's a bad solution, because a publisher understands very quickly what it means that they pay the bill. And if you, as the scientist, don't care about what the bill is, then the whole system is going to collapse again, and or it will go skyrocketing again. So the principle of the diamond is to say, there must be a limit. And in Plan S, the consortium of funders have said the APCs, so the payment, has to be capped. So they're conscious of it. But unfortunately, what they have not said very clearly is what they mean by capped, because you can cap things at any level that you like. You can cap things at 30,000 euros, of course, for a paper. But I think the idea is clearly not that. But nobody knows if the cap will be at 500 or 1,000 or 2,000, and it may just be very different from one journal to another, because of the demand, because of the number of submissions.
I see comments here basically saying that in some institutions they are mandated to do some form of open access, and in others they are encouraged.
Yes.
So from your experience, which side, and we know what you've done, but from your experience, what do you think is realistic? Do researchers need to be mandated to do open access, or can they be encouraged?
Okay, we have a study on this that we did with a group funded by the European Commission. We did a survey, and we found out in more than 600 universities in Europe, if you don't have a repository, of course it's zero. If you have a repository, and if you tell your people that you have a repository and it's available, then you fill it by 7% on average. So 7% of the production of the university is in the repository, which is useless, okay? If you have a mandate, like many universities have, which is to say you must, then what happens is you climb to 17% on average. Goes from 12 to 25. But the average is at 17 precisely. So we go up from 7 to 17. If you have a mandate the Liège way, that is, you must, but also be sure that if you're asking for any money for any personal assistant, for a secretary, for desk space, for material, instrumentation, anything that you'd want, or a personal promotion, the list of publication that you are going to submit must come from the repository and not from yourself. The one that comes from yourself goes to the wastebasket. Take only the one that comes from the machine. When people understand that very, very quickly, and the next year, after we started that, the next year we had the promotion in the academic personnel, and we saw a boom in the the repository, and we reached 90%. So you're going from 17% to 90%. So it all depends on what you want. For the university, it's very important to have 90%. For the researcher, it's very important, I think, to be in the system, because or else you're being read much less. And people understand that very quickly when they receive requests, when they're called by colleagues in Australia saying, "I'd like to work with you," that they suddenly understand.
And the next question is related to the transparency of APCs, so article processing charges, or what you pay to publish an article in open access. So the question is, would making APCs transparent be a way to counter the threat of increasing APCs? And what other ways do we have?
I think that it's the best way. Transparency is always the best way, and the best proof is that the publishers are very, very, very much against it. Even subscriptions, they even have secrets on deals that they're making with universities, and now with countries and consortium in countries. They're trying to hide how much it costs, so that they can let everybody believe that they have the best deal. And so it's the same thing with the APCs. But in fact, there is transparency, because if you look at a journal which is publishing with APC, they put it in the application form. You see how much you are going to pay as an APC for your paper. So they don't hide that so much, but then they play on the prestige side to say, we are very prestigious, and if you want to publish here, it's more expensive. Then we have extra cost. And so we're not going to resolve that very quickly and very easily, unless we have really a system which is publicly controlled.
And a final short question as we get up to the last 5 minutes. So when we ask our representatives and our associations and early career researchers what they think about open science, they are all very much in favor of open science and supportive, although they don't always know what that is and how to do it. And we see a huge generation gap, a discrepancy when we talk to senior researchers who are embedded in that system of publishing and impact and closed access, and in a way who have even propagated that system and profited from it. So a question to you is, for early career researchers, what can they do if their supervisors or their mentors are in principle against open science, open access, and advise them or tell them not to publish in open access? What can they do practically, and what can they tell them?
Well, it's a very difficult question, because it's a question of confronting generations, and of course the old people, and I'm older than many of them, have understandably in their culture, it's very deep rooted in their culture, because for 50 years they've been told that that's the way it is. But some of us have been able to get out of it and to understand that that open science is really a philosophy. It's really a way to look at life. We are, in fact, in exactly the same situation as we have with the young generation now and the climate change. See, the young generation is down in the streets now, telling the old farts that we've spoiled the whole thing, and that and actually everything has to change, and we should move quickly. And so I cannot tell the young researchers, because there are not so many, to go down in the streets and have and shout about how the system should be changed. So that's certainly not something that we can do. But you know, I've been for at least 10 years traveling many different places in universities all over the world, and the idea is to try to spread the word and to say to the young generation, well, keep hoping and just keep trying to convince. But it's very difficult for a young researcher to tell an old one how it should be done. You know, it's a very basic generation gap, which is very difficult. But we faced generation gaps all along history, and it's always the young generation that wins.
Bernard, one final question to you, and just literally 1 minute. Take-home message from you to early career researchers on open access. So what do you want to tell them, or what tips would you have for them?
I would say that without putting themselves in danger, in case they realize that they're really in danger if they're doing so, but otherwise they can join a number of initiatives which are part of open science. They should look at the whole landscape of open science and understand that it is really something important in terms of humanity. Access to knowledge is extremely important in these times of extremisms of all kinds. So it's really a social combat to join it. And there is also a little part called citizen science, which is part of open science, and in which everybody can join and help. And this is probably also a way that we are going to squeeze into open science people that are really wondering how to get there.
Okay, thank you for that, Bernard. That was all very clear. And I think I'll advertise your book, which I know you've just published on open science, and it is in open access, and that's freely available online. And we'll put the links to that in the curriculum.
And no profit for me, so please get it, download it.
We will share it. We will share it with everybody on the course. So I want to say thank you for that. Thank you also to Ivo and Roberta for organizing the YouTube chat and passing us all the questions. Our next webinar will be webinar number 3 will be on open/fair data, and that should be with Baden Mons, who is a professor at Leiden University, but is also in charge of the Go Fair initiative, and I believe he's also president of Code Data. So we will have a talk with Barend on open/fair data. That's all for me. Thank you to all of our ambassadors. Good luck with the curriculum, and we'll see you all in the next webinar. And thank you again, Bernard.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.